Hello, everyone. Hi. Wow, that was way... I did not expect... Hang on, let me try that again. Hello, everyone. That was not meant to be anywhere near as deep and, frankly, sultry as that. I apologise. Hi, I am Sam, and you are listening to Chilliteracy, where, yeah, I am... still a little husky. I feel like I don't know, the cold that I got hit with wasn't especially bad, but it was just enough to, like, take me out, and now it's sort of set up a semi-permanent residence in my lungs and chest, and it's just hanging around a little bit, so, with various complications that go with that, I think. So, I've been a little bit rough in intervals, and not been able to stream anywhere near as much as I would like over the last couple of weeks. But here I am tonight, this evening, with... This will be a shorter stream. Not least because I was trying to work out, like, the pacing of this book to, like, how many streams to the end. And it's... I'm having... Yo, what is that drawing? Having a real nightmare trying to figure out, like, how to split this up, because it feels like one I can get through really quickly, potentially, but also that I'm aware that if I start planning for that, then there's a risk of, like, a 3-hour stream, and nobody who matters wants that. With a very important clause thrown into that sentence. You're ashamed to admit you do not remember at all what this book is? No, because it's been like 7 months since we started it. Oh, you caught that, did you? Okay, good. Yeah, so, not firstly because we've already had about 10 minutes of ramble, but I wish to apologise to everyone who has been hoping for more of this, because it's been a long time since we read part 1. This is, or will be, The Diary of a Nobody by George and Weedon Grossmith, about just a guy and his wife who, he decided that he would start keeping a diary because other people... Also, what makes a welcome return is cat hair in the mouth. Love that. That's great. Oh, wait, I have some subscribers to thank. That was, of course, don't I? Thank you. Sorry. Andy Pants. Thank you for the 37 months. Yeah, so 30, I love how Twitch does that. Resubscribe for 36 months. They've been subscribed for 37 months. Twitch, pick a number. Your sub's as old as you are. Wow, damn. Yeah, that's almost halfway to the metric year. Thank you. Corolla, thank you for the 29 months. Greetings. And Angeline. I kind of needed 2 attempts to get that one, but yes, enjoy your Joey emotes. Thank you also for the 26 months. Much appreciated. Lovely to see you all. And everyone else, you don't have to hit a subscribe or resubscribe button to be welcomed here. It's all good. You've still not finished Barchester Towers? Dang. Yeah, I mean, it's a lot of books to catch up on. That's what you're saying about you've got to listen to Dracula. And I was very pleased to see that on iPlayer here in the UK, they have available for viewing. Well, they also have Alien, which I'm very excited about, but they have Bram Stoker's Dracula, which I have never seen, and I'm going to want. I have to see it because I think that's the one with, like, Gary Oldman, just hamming it up, and there's. I think that could be a good time, so I'm going to have to watch that before it disappears in there. You have a cat with you, but you have not acquired it, as he is scared when you cough. Oh no. He just watches you from afar with a squint. Ah, bless. Joey is currently curled up asleep on the bed, but I'm sure at one point the constant sound of my voice will suddenly wake him up and he will come over to demand to go on my lap, so I'm kind of already prepared for that. I'm in my new chill pose that I've been doing for the last few of these streams when I've been able to, just like leaning back in the chair, feet up on the desk. This is the vibe I bring to this. You can't summon the boy; he'll be summoned. Don't worry. my voice wakes him up, but it's so good to sleep to. It does. He just like he yeah, he hears me talking and he's like, oh yeah, that guy. Yeah, I love that, and would like seek me out and demands to go on my lap. But yeah, where we were before, what is his what is our guy's name? It's Charles Pooter is his name. Who has just decided to keep a diary because other people keep diaries. And so he thought, yeah, I'm going to do that too. My life doesn't have to be exciting. I'm just going to do it. And he just fills his diary with accounts of his friends, Mr. Gowing and Mr. Cummings, who are perpetual visitors. His wife, Carrie, and just various social faux pas that they tend to commit, such as like painting the bath. Like he went on a bit of a kick for like painting everything with enamel paint and painted the bath red, and then thought he'd just spontaneously started like bleeding. He hadn't. It was just the red paint coming off the bath. Had like a big formal soiree with like the local mayor or whatever, yeah, Lord Mayor, inviting him and all other sorts of folk to a big gathering that he attended, and I think went arse over tea kettle, as the youth say, and landed on his head while attempting to dance, sort of like that famous tweet, "Hey, watch this! I kick my leg out from underneath me and land face first in the ground. No one had any idea what I was trying to do." That's not the exact wording of it, but you get the gist. Ass over tea kettle, something like that. Yeah. Your kitty is hypnotising himself with his rhythmic kneading on the blanket next to me. Oh, lovely. That is not a real thing people say, is it? Yes, it is. I have heard various interpretations of that expression. I believe that particular variant of it, I think I actually heard used in Austin Powers. You have not? Ah, well then there you go. Welcome. That's in your 37th month you have learned a new phrase. You've also never heard that? Dave, welcome in. You've just come into, I guess, I'm not even going to, I mean, I guess if I say arse over tea kettle, it sounds very British. Idiom education minute. Raven, thank you very much for the 13 months. It's good to see you. Welcome. And yeah, welcome in, Dave Raiders. I trust you had a good time building a house. I was trying to make House of Leaves jokes in chat. Eventually, I got to them far too late, but, you know, Andy learned new vocab hours. Hell yeah, stick it on the wiki. Yeah. I don't know. If you're just joining us, you haven't missed much. Certainly, in reference to the book, we're only one stream in because we started this like a month ago, and then I got ill, and various other things happened. Needs to be in a song first? I bet it is. I'm reading my own diary today. Mods, pour water in this man's shoes. Now. Yeah, I don't know what, if I have anything else to do. You know, might as well get into it. So, if you've just come over, I was saying it's probably going to be a shorter stream. Well, it's definitely going to be a shorter stream tonight. I'm only really planning to do like one half. I don't know how much of the book I'm actually going to cover, because I seem to get through it fairly fast because of the way that it's written and laid out. But yeah, I am still battling off some kind of a cold and general like ick that has settled in to my entire body, and so I don't have a long stream in me, but it's also been 73 years since we last read anything from this book, so it seemed like a good time to get back to it. Thank you. I'm trying to feel better. I'm not, generally not doing too bad. It's just under the weather. And, you know, as a Brit, that weather's never particularly nice, so, yeah. Yeah, no, if we're all ready and good, did I not, I did, hang on a second. Yeah. There we go, just a sign of how well I'm doing. I put the link to what we're reading, where there's your link at the top of chat, and a reminder that we're starting from chapter 6. Obviously we're not going to stay there, due to the linear progression of such things. We'll move on beyond chapter 6, I'm sure, at some point. Look out for that. That's a very exciting transition to maybe even the dizzying heights of chapter 7. Who knows? And beyond, possibly. But yeah, if you've got water or something else, as I have, my streams are decorating time. Good. Enjoy decorating. I hope that is, yeah, I could see that being quite nice, actually. But watching, oh hello, just looking across at one of my shelves of films and games, and just seeing it's not anchored to the wall, and just seeing it, like, looking like it's leaning forward. I would rather that not fall over, but I don't really know how best to prevent it. Yeah, like, watching a bit of interior decorating does put me in a mind for, like, there has been, at times over the years, a certain satisfaction that comes from, like, repainting a room, and, like, all the work that goes into that, like, pulling all the furniture into the middle or out of the room, and then doing the walls, and then just kind of standing back at the end of the day and be like, yeah, it's going to look nice, and then you put everything back in, and it's a nice, cozy new room. Wall anchors are a thing. Put them on your shelves. It can literally save lives. Oh yeah, no, I know. This is the thing, that I'm aware that it hasn't been done, and that's why I look at it suspiciously every time. Okay. We don't get a lot of earthquakes here, Squirrel. I'm gonna be real with you. Not a huge amount of tectonic action. In fact, I think I've missed pretty much every earthquake that I've ever heard of reported here. Like, almost certainly any time, I would always encounter someone like, did you feel that earthquake last night? No. What? And I was like, oh, were you asleep? No, it was at like 7 PM. I was in the shower. What? And just, I don't know. I'm just completely oblivious to earthquakes. I mean, I used to live on a flight path, so you just generally have noisy things going over, and where I am now is very close to a very fairly busy main road with a lot of heavy lorries going down that just, like, vibrate the house anyway. So I'm not saying, oh, that's like an earthquake, but like a UK scale earthquake, you know. You don't need tectonic action for earthquakes. Right. Toddlers and cats are also significant risk factors. Yeah, well, not a lot of one of those, a fair bit of the other. Anyway, you're going to judge me from chat, and that's okay, you can do that. I'm going to start reading. Let's kick off and see where we go. If we're all ready, and even if we aren't ready or sat comfortably, I'm going to do it. I don't need your permission. My stream. We shall begin with Chapter 6 of The Diary of a Nobody by George and Weedon Grossmith. The unexpected arrival home of our son, Willie Lupin Pooter. August 4th. The first post brought a nice letter from our dear son, Willie, acknowledging a trifling present which Carrie sent him, the day before yesterday being his 20th birthday. To our utter amazement, he turned up himself in the afternoon, having journeyed all the way from Oldham. He said he had got leave from the bank, and as Monday was a holiday, he thought he would give us a little surprise. 1 second. Wait. August 5th, Sunday. We have not seen Willie since last Christmas, and are pleased to notice what a fine young man he has grown. One would scarcely believe he was Carrie's son. He looks more like a younger brother. I rather disapprove of his wearing a check suit on a Sunday, and I think he ought to have gone to church this morning. But he said he was tired after yesterday's journey, so I refrained from any remark on the subject. We had a bottle of port for dinner and drank dear Willie's health. He said, "Oh, by the by, did I tell you I've cut my first name, William, and taken the second name, Lupin? In fact, I'm only known at Oldham as Lupin Pooter. If you were to Willie me there, they wouldn't know what you meant." Of course, Lupin being a purely family name, Carrie was delighted, and began by giving a long history of the Lupins. I ventured to say that I thought William a nice, simple name, and reminded him he was christened after his uncle William, who was much respected in the city. Willie, in a manner which I did not much care for, said sneeringly, "Oh, I know all about that. Good old Bill," and helped himself to a third glass of port. Carrie objected strongly to my saying "good old," but she made no remark when Willie used the double adjective. I said nothing, but looked at her, which meant more. I said, "My dear Willie, I hope you are happy with your colleagues at the bank." He replied, "Lupin, if you please. And with respect to the bank, there's not a clerk who is a gentleman, and the boss is a cad." I felt so shocked I could say nothing, and my instincts told me there was something wrong. Second, there is something wrong. There's cat hair on the mic that is going at some point to drift into my mouth. August 6th, Bank Holiday. As there was no sign of Lupin moving at 9 o'clock, I knocked at his door, and said we usually breakfasted at 8:30, and asked how long he would be. Lupin replied that he had had a lively time of it, first with the trains shaking the house all night, and then with the sun streaming in through the window in his eyes, and giving him a cracking headache. Carrie came up and asked him if he would like some breakfast sent up, and he said he could do with a cup of tea, and didn't want anything to eat. Lupin not having come down, I went up again at 1:30, and said we dined at 2. That was a car, so I thought I had fireworks. He said he would be there. He never came down till 2:45. I said, "We have not seen much of you, and you will have to return by the 5:30 train. Therefore you will have to leave in an hour, unless you go by the midnight mail." He said, "Look here, Governor, it's no use speaking about the bush. I've tendered my resignation at the bank." For a moment I could not speak. When my speech came again, I said, "How dare you, sir? How dare you take such a serious step without consulting me? Don't answer me, sir. You will sit down immediately and write a note at my dictation withdrawing your resignation and amply apologizing for your thoughtlessness." Imagine my dismay when he replied with a loud guffaw. "It's no use. If you want the good old truth, I've got the chuck." August 7th. Mr. Perkup has given me leave to postpone my holiday a week, as we could not get the rooms. This will give us an opportunity of trying to find an appointment for Willie before we go. The ambition of my life would be to get him into Mr. Perkup's firm. August 11th. Although it is a serious matter having our boy Lupin on our hands, still it is satisfactory to know he was asked to resign from the bank simply because he took no interest in his work and always arrived an hour, sometimes 2 hours, late. We can all start off on Monday to Broadstairs with a light heart. This will take my mind off the worry of the last few days, which have been wasted over a useless correspondence with the manager of the bank at Oldham. August 13th. Hurrah! At Broadstairs. Very nice apartments near the station. On the cliffs they would have been double the price. The landlady had a nice 5 o'clock dinner and tea ready, which we all enjoyed, though Lupin seemed fastidious because there happened to be a fly in the butter. It was very wet in the evening, for which I was thankful, as it was a good excuse for going to bed early. Lupin said he would sit up and read a bit. August 14th. I was a little annoyed to find Lupin, instead of reading last night, had gone to a common sort of entertainment given at the assembly rooms. I expressed my opinion that such performances were unworthy of respectable patronage, but he replied, "Oh, it's only for one night only. I had a fit of the blues come on, and thought I would go see Polly Presswell, England's particular spark." I told him I was proud to say I had never heard of her. Carrie said, "Do let the boy alone. He's quite old enough to take care of himself, and won't forget he's a gentleman. Remember, you were young once yourself." Rained all day hard, but Lupin would go out. August 15th. Cleared up a bit, so we all took the train to Margate, and the first person we met on the jetty was Gowing. I said, "Hello, I thought you had gone to Barmouth with your Birmingham friends." He said, "Yeah, but young Peter Lawrence was so ill they postponed their visit, so I came down here. You know the Cummings are here too." Carrie said, "Oh, that will be delightful. We must have some evenings together and have games." I introduced Lupin, saying, "You will be pleased to find we have our dear boy at home." Gowing said, "How's that? You don't mean to say he's left the bank?" I changed the subject quickly, and thereby avoided any of those awkward questions which Gowing always has a knack of asking. August 16th. Lupin positively refused to walk down the parade with me because I was wearing my new straw helmet with my frock coat. I don't know what the boy's coming to. August 17th. Lupin not falling in with our views, Carrie and I went for a sail. It was a relief to be with her alone, for when Lupin irritates me, she always sides with him. On our return, he said, "Ah, you've been on the shilling emetic, have you? You'll come to Sixpenneth and the liver jerker next." I presume he meant a tricycle, but I affected not to understand him. August 18th. Gowing and Cummings walked over to arrange an evening at Margate. It being wet, Gowing asked Cummings to accompany him to the hotel and have a game of billiards, knowing I never play, and in fact disapprove of the game. Cummings said he must hasten back to Margate, whereupon Lupin, to my horror, said, "I'll give you a game, Gowing, 100 up. A walk round the cloth will give me an appetite for dinner." I said, "Perhaps Mr. Gowing does not care to play with boys." Gowing surprised me by saying, "Ah, yes, I do, if they play well," and they walked off together. August 19th, Sunday. I was about to read Lupin a sermon on smoking, which he indulges in violently, and billiards, but he put on his hat and walked out. Carrie then read me a long sermon on the palpable inadvisability of treating Lupin as if he were a mere child. I felt she was somewhat right, so in the evening I offered him a cigar. He seemed pleased, but after a few whiffs said, "This is a good old tuppenny, try one of mine," and he handed me a cigar as long as it was strong, which is saying a good deal. August 20th. I am glad our last day at the seaside was fine, though clouded overhead. We went over to Cummings at Margate in the evening, and as it was cold, we stayed in and played games. Gowing, as usual, overstepping the mark. He suggested we should play cutlets, a game we had never heard of. He sat on a chair and asked Carrie to sit on his lap, an invitation which dear Carrie rightly declined. After some species of wrangling, I sat on Gowing's knees and Carrie sat on the edge of mine. Lupin sat on the edge of Carrie's lap, then Cummings on Lupin's and Mrs. Cummings on her husband's. We looked very ridiculous and laughed a good deal. Gowing then said, "Are you a believer in the Great Mogul?" We had to answer all together, "Yes, oh yes," 3 times. Gowing said, "So am I," and suddenly got up. The result of this stupid joke was that we all fell on the ground, and poor Carrie banged her head against the corner of the fender. Mrs. Cummings put some vinegar on, but through this we missed the last train and had to drive back to Broadstairs, which cost me 7/6. Chapter 7. Home again. Mrs. James's influence on Carrie. Can get nothing for Lupin. Next-door neighbours are a little troublesome. Someone tampers with my diary. Got a place for Lupin. Lupin startles us with an announcement. August 22nd. Home, sweet home again. Carrie brought some pretty blue wool mats to stand vases on. Phipps, James and Co. write to say they are sorry they have no vacancy among their staff of clerks for Lupin. August 23rd. I bought a pair of stag's heads made of plaster of Paris and coloured brown. They will look just the thing for our little hall and give it style. The heads are excellent imitations. Poolers and Smith are sorry they have nothing to offer Lupin. August 24th. Simply to please Lupin and make things cheerful for him, as he is a little down, Carrie invited Mrs. James to come up from Sutton and spend 2 or 3 days with us. We have not said a word to Lupin, but mean to keep it as a surprise. August 25th. Mrs. James of Sutton arrived in the afternoon, bringing with her an enormous bunch of wild flowers. The more I see of Mrs. James, the nicer I think she is, and she is devoted to Carrie. She went into Carrie's room to take off her bonnet and remained there nearly an hour talking about dress. Lupin said he was not a bit surprised at Mrs. James' visit, but was surprised at her. August 26th, Sunday. Nearly late for church, Mrs. James having talked considerably about what to wear all the morning. Lupin does not seem to get on very well with Mrs. James. I am afraid we shall have some trouble with our next-door neighbours who came in last Wednesday. Several of their friends who drive up in dog-carts have already made themselves objectionable. An evening or 2 ago I had put on a white waistcoat for coolness, and while walking past with my thumbs in my waistcoat pockets, a habit I have, one man, seated in the cart and looking like an American, commenced singing some vulgar nonsense about I had $13 in my waistcoat pocket. I fancied it was meant for me, and my suspicions were confirmed, for while walking round the garden in my tall hat this afternoon, a throw-down cracker was deliberately aimed at my hat, and exploded on it like a percussion cap. I turned sharply, and am positive I saw the man who was in the cart retreating from one of the bedroom windows. August 27th. Carrie and Mrs. James went off shopping and had not returned when I came back from the office. Judging from the subsequent conversation, I am afraid Mrs. James is filling Carrie's head with a lot of nonsense about dress. I walked over to Gowing's and asked him to drop in to supper and make things pleasant. Carrie prepared a little extemporized supper, consisting of the remainder of the cold joint, a small piece of salmon, which I was to refuse in case there was not enough to go around, and a blancmange and custards. There was also a decanter of port and some jam puffs on the sideboard. Mrs. James made us play a rather good game of cards called Muggings. To my surprise, in fact disgust, Lupin got up in the middle and, in a most sarcastic tone, said, "Pardon me, this sort of thing is too fast for me. I shall go and enjoy a quiet game of marbles in the back garden." Things might have become rather disagreeable, but for Gowing, who seems to have taken to Lupin, suggesting they should invent games. Lupin said, "Well, let's play monkeys." He then led Gowing all round the room and brought him in front of the looking-glass. I must confess I laughed heartily at this. I was a little vexed at everybody subsequently laughing at some joke which they did not explain, and it was only on going to bed I discovered I must have been walking about all evening with an antimacassar on one button of my coat-tails. August 28th. Found a large brick in the middle bed of geraniums, evidently come from next door. Pattles and Pattles can't find a place for Lupin. August 29th. Mrs. James is making a positive fool of Carrie. Carrie appeared in a new dress like a smock frock. She said smocking was all the rage. I replied it put me in a rage. She also had on a hat as big as a kitchen coal scuttle and the same shape. Mrs. James went home, and both Lupin and I were somewhat pleased. The first time we have agreed on a single subject since his return. Merkins and Son write they have no vacancy for Lupin. October 30th. I should very much like to know who has wilfully torn the last 5 or 6 weeks out of my diary. It is perfectly monstrous. Mine is a large scribbling diary with plenty of space for the record of my everyday events, and in keeping up that record I take, with much pride, a great deal of pains. I asked Carrie if she knew anything about it. She replied it was my own fault for leaving the diary about, with the charwoman cleaning and the sweeps in the house. I said that was not an answer to my question. This retort of mine, which I thought extremely smart, would have been more effective had I not jogged my elbow against a vase on the table, temporarily placed in the passage, knocked it over, and smashed it. Carrie was dreadfully upset at this disaster, for it was one of a pair of vases which cannot be matched, given to us on our wedding day by Mrs. Burstet, an old friend of Carrie's cousins, the Pomertons, late of Dalston. I called to Sarah and asked her about the diary. She said she had not been in the sitting room at all. After the sweep had left, Mrs. Birrell, the charwoman, had cleaned the room and lighted the fire herself. Finding a burnt piece of paper in the grate, I examined it and found it was a piece of my diary. So it was evident someone had torn my diary to light the fire. I requested Mrs. Birrell to be sent to me tomorrow. October 31st. Received a letter from my principal, Mr. Perkup, saying he thinks he knows of a place at last for our dear boy Lupin. This, in a measure, consoles me for the loss of a portion of my diary, for I am bound to confess the last few weeks have been devoted to the record of disappointing answers received from people to whom I have applied for appointments for Lupin. Mrs. Birrell called, and, in reply to me, said she never seen no book, much less take such a liberty as touch it. I said I was determined to find out who did it, whereupon she said she would do her best to help me, but she remembered the sweep lighting the fire with a bit of the echo. I requested the sweep to be sent to me tomorrow. I wish Carrie had not given Lupin a latchkey. We never seemed to see anything of him. I sat up till past 1 for him, and then retired, tired. November 1st. My entry yesterday about retired, tired, which I did not notice at the time, is rather funny. If I were not so worried just now, I might have had a little joke about it. The sweep called, but had the audacity to come up to the hall door and lean his dirty bag of soot on the doorstep. He, however, was so polite I could not rebuke him. He said Sarah lighted the fire. Unfortunately, Sarah heard this, for she was dusting the banisters, and she ran down and flew into a temper with the sweep, causing a row on the front doorsteps, which I would not have had happen for anything. I ordered her about her business, and told the sweep I was sorry to have troubled him. And so I was, for the doorsteps were covered with soot in consequence of his visit. I would willingly give 10 shillings to find out who tore my diary. November 2nd. I spent the evening quietly with Carrie, of whose company I never tire. We had a most pleasant chat about the letters on Is Marriage a Failure? It has been no failure in our case. In talking over our own happy experiences, we never noticed that it was past midnight. We were startled by hearing the door slam violently. Lupin had come in. He made no attempt to turn down the gas in the passage, or even to look into the room where we were, but went straight up to bed, making a terrible noise. I asked him to come down for a moment, and he begged to be excused, as he was dead beat, an observation that was scarcely consistent with the fact that for a quarter of an hour afterwards he was positively dancing in his room and shouting out, "See me dance the polka," or some such nonsense. November 3rd. Good news at last. Mr. Perkup has got an appointment for Lupin, and he is to go and see about it on Monday. Oh, how my mind is relieved. I went to Lupin's room to take the good news to him, but he was in bed, very seedy, so I resolved to keep it over till the evening. He said he had last night been elected a member of the amateur dramatic club, called the Holloway Comedians, and, though it was a pleasant evening, he had sat in a draught and got neuralgia in the head. He declined to have any breakfast, so I left him. In the evening, I had a special bottle of port, and, Lupin being in for a wonder, we filled our glasses, and I said, "Lupin, my boy, I have some good and unexpected news for you. Mr. Perkup has procured you an appointment." Lupin said, "Good biz," and we drained our glasses. Lupin then said, "Fill up the glasses again, for I have some good and unexpected news for you." I had some slight misgivings, and so evidently had Carrie, for she said, "I hope we shall think it good news." Lupin said, "Oh, it's all right. I'm engaged to be married." Chapter 8. Daisy Mutler, sole topic of conversation. Lupin's new berth. Fireworks at the Cummingses. The Holloway Comedians. Sarah quarrels with the charwoman. Lupin's uncalled-for interference. Am introduced to Daisy Mutler. We decide to give a party in her honour. November 5th, Sunday. Carrie and I troubled about that mere boy Lupin getting engaged to be married without consulting us or anything. After dinner, he told us all about it. He said the lady's name was Daisy Mutler, and she was the nicest, prettiest, and most accomplished girl he ever met. He loved her the moment he saw her, and if he had to wait 50 years, he would wait, and he knew she would wait for him. Lupin further said, with much warmth, that the world was a different world to him now. It was a world worth living in. He lived with an object now, and that was to make Daisy Mutler Daisy Pooter, and he would guarantee she would not disgrace the family of the Pooters. Carrie here burst out crying and threw her arms around his neck, and in doing so upset the glass of port he held in his hand all over his new light trousers. I said I had no doubt we should like Miss Mutler when we saw her, but Carrie said she loved her already. I thought this rather premature, but held my tongue. Daisy Mutler was the sole topic of conversation for the remainder of the day. I asked Lupin who her people were, and he replied, "Oh, you know, Mutler, Williams, and Watts." I did not know, but refrained from asking any further questions at present, for fear of irritating Lupin. November 6th. Lupin went with me to the office and had a long conversation with Mr. Perkup, our principal, the result of which was that he accepted a clerkship at the firm of Job, Clennons & Co., stock and share brokers. Lupin told me, privately, it was an advertising firm and he did not think much of it. I replied, beggars should not be choosers, and I will do Lupin the justice to say he looked rather ashamed of himself. In the evening, we went round to the Cummingses to have a few fireworks. It began to rain, and I thought it rather dull. One of my squibs would not go off, and Gowing said, "Hit it on your boot, boy. It'll go off then." I gave it a few knocks on the end of my boot, and it went off with one loud explosion, and burnt my fingers rather badly. I gave the rest of the squibs to the little Cummings boy to let off. Another unfortunate thing happened, which brought a heap of abuse on my head. Cummings fastened a large wheel set-piece on a stake in the ground by way of a grand finale. He made a great fuss about it, said it cost 7 shillings. There was a little difficulty in getting it alight. At last it went off, but after a couple of slow revolutions it stopped. I had my stick with me, so I gave it a tap to send it round, and unfortunately it fell off the stake onto the grass. Anybody would have thought I had set the house on fire from the way in which they stormed at me. I will never join in any more firework parties. It is a ridiculous waste of time and money. November 7th. Lupin asked Carrie to call on Mrs. Mutler, but Carrie said she thought Mrs. Mutler ought to call on her first. I agreed with Carrie, and this led to an argument. However, the matter was settled by Carrie saying she could not find any visiting cards, and we must get some more printed, and when they were finished would be quite time to discuss the etiquette of calling. November 8th. I ordered some of our cards at Black's, the stationer's. I ordered 25 of each, which will last us for a good long time. In the evening, Lupin brought in Frank Mutler, Miss Mutler's brother. He was a rather gawky youth, and Lupin said he was the most popular and best amateur in the club, referring to the Holloway comedians. Lupin whispered to us that if we could only draw out Frank a bit, he would make us roar with laughter. At supper, young Mutler did several amusing things. He took up a knife, and with the flat part of it played a tune on his cheeks in a wonderful manner. He also gave an imitation of an old man with no teeth, smoking a big cigar. The way he kept dropping the cigar sent Carrie into fits. In the course of conversation, Daisy's name cropped up, and young Mutler said he would bring his sister round to us one evening, his parents being rather old-fashioned and not going out much. Carrie said we would get up a little special party. As young Mutler showed no inclination to go, and it was approaching 11 o'clock, as a hint I reminded Lupin that he had to be up early tomorrow. Instead of taking the hint, Mutler began a series of comic imitations. He went on for an hour without cessation. Poor Carrie could scarcely keep her eyes open. At last she made an excuse and said, "Good night." Mutler then left, and I heard him and Lupin whispering in the hall something about the Holloway comedians, and to my disgust, although it was past midnight, Lupin put on his hat and coat and went out with his new companion. November 9th. My endeavours to discover who tore the sheets out of my diary still fruitless. Lupin has Daisy Mutler on the brain, so we see little of him, except that he invariably turns up at mealtimes. Cummings dropped in. November 10th. Lupin seems to like his new berth. That's a comfort. Daisy Mutler, the sole topic of conversation during tea. Carrie almost as full of it as Lupin. Lupin informs me, to my disgust, that he has been persuaded to take part in the forthcoming performance of the Holloway comedians. He says he is to play Bob Britches in the farce Gone to My Uncle's. Frank Mutler is going to play Old Musty. I told Lupin pretty plainly I was not in the least degree interested in the matter, and totally disapproved of amateur theatricals. Gowing came in the evening. November 11th. Returned home to find the house in a most disgraceful uproar. Carrie, who appeared very frightened, was standing outside her bedroom, while Sarah was excited and crying. Mrs. Birrell, the charwoman, who had evidently been drinking, was shouting at the top of her voice that she was no thief, that she was a respectable woman who had to work hard for her living, and she would smack anyone's face who put lies into her mouth. Lupin, whose back was towards me, did not hear me come in. He was standing between the two women, and, I regret to say, in his endeavour to act as peacemaker, he made use of rather strong language in the presence of his mother. And I was just in time to hear him say, "And all this fuss about the loss of a few pages from a rotten diary that wouldn't fetch 3.5 a pound." I said, quietly, "Pardon me, Lupin, that is a matter of opinion, and as I am master of this house, perhaps you will allow me to take the reins." I ascertained that the cause of the row was that Sarah had accused Mrs. Birrell of tearing the pages out of my diary to wrap up some kitchen fat and leavings which she had taken out of the house last week. Mrs. Birrell had slapped Sarah's face, and said she had taken nothing out of the place, as there was never no leavings to take. I ordered Sarah back to her work, and requested Mrs. Birrell to go home. When I entered the parlour, Lupin was kicking his legs in the air, and roaring with laughter. November 12th, Sunday. Coming home from church, Carrie and I met Lupin, Daisy Mutler, and her brother. Daisy was introduced to us, and we walked home together, Carrie walking on with Miss Mutler. We asked them in for a few minutes, and I had a good look at my future daughter-in-law. My heart quite sank. She is a big young woman, and I should think at least 8 years older than Lupin. I did not even think her good-looking. Carrie asked her if she could come in on Wednesday next with her brother and meet a few friends. She replied that she would only be too pleased. November 13th. Carrie sent out invitations to Gowing, the Cummings, to Mr. and Mrs. James of Sutton, and Mr. Stilbrook. I wrote a note to Mr. Franching of Peckham. Carrie said we may as well make it a nice affair, and why not ask our principal, Mr. Perkupp? I said I feared we were not quite grand enough for him. Carrie said there was no offence in asking him. I said certainly not, and wrote him a letter. Carrie confessed she was a little disappointed with Daisy Mutler's appearance, but thought she seemed a nice girl. November 14th. Everybody so far has accepted for our quite grand little party for tomorrow. Mr. Perkupp, in a nice letter which I shall keep, wrote that he was dining in Kensington, but if he could get away he would come up to Holloway for an hour. Carrie was busy all day, making little cakes and open jam puffs and jellies. She said she felt quite nervous about her responsibilities tomorrow evening. We decided to have some light things on the table, such as sandwiches, cold chicken and ham, and some sweets, and on the sideboard a nice piece of cold beef and a paysandu tongue for the more hungry ones to peg into if they liked. Gowing called to know if he was to put on swallowtails tomorrow. Carrie said he had better dress, especially as Mr. Franching was coming, and there was a possibility of Mr. Perkupp also putting in an appearance. Gowing said, I only wanted to know, for I have not worn my dress coat for some time, and I must send it to have the creases pressed out. After Gowing left, Lupin came in, and, in his anxiety to please Daisy Mutler, carped at and criticised the arrangements, and in fact disapproved of everything, including our having asked our old friend Cummings, who, he said, would look in evening dress like a greengrocer engaged to wait, and who must not be surprised if Daisy took him for one. I fairly lost my temper, and said, Lupin, allow me to tell you Miss Daisy Mutler is not the Queen of England. I gave you credit for more wisdom than to allow yourself to be inveigled into an engagement with a woman considerably older than yourself. I advise you to think of earning your living before entangling yourself with a wife whom you will have to support, and in all probability her brother also, who appeared to be nothing but a loafer. Instead of receiving this advice in a sensible manner, Lupin jumped up and said, If you insult the lady I am engaged to, you insult me. I will leave the house and never darken your doors again. He went out of the house, slamming the hall door. But it was all right. He came back to supper, and we played bezique till nearly 12 o'clock. Chapter 9. Our first important party. Old friends and new friends. Gowing is a little annoying, but his friend, Mr. Stilbrook, turns out to be quite amusing. Inopportune arrival of Mr. Perkupp, but he is most kind and complimentary. Party, a great success. November 15th. A red letter day. Our first important party since we have been in this house. I got home from the city. Lupin insisted on having a hired waiter and stood a half-dozen of champagne. I think this is an unnecessary expense, but Lupin said he had a piece of luck, having made £3 out of a private deal in the city. I hope he won't gamble in his new situation. The supper room looked so nice, and Carrie truly said we need not be ashamed of its being seen by Mr. Perkupp, should he honour us by coming. I dressed early in case people should arrive punctually at 8 o'clock, and was much vexed to find my new dress trousers much too short. Lupin, who is getting beyond his position, found fault with my wearing ordinary boots instead of dress boots. I replied satirically, "My dear son, I have lived to be above that sort of thing." Lupin burst out laughing and said, "A man generally was above his boots." This may be funny, or it may not, but I was gratified to find he had not discovered the coral had come off one of my studs. Carrie looked a picture, wearing the dress she wore at the mansion house. The arrangement of the drawing-room was excellent. Carrie had hung muslin curtains over the folding doors, and also over the entrances, for we had removed the door from its hinges. Mr. Peters, the waiter, arrived in good time, and I gave him strict orders not to open another bottle of champagne until the previous one was empty. Carrie arranged for some sherry and port wine to be placed in the drawing-room sideboard, with some glasses. By the by, our new enlarged and tinted photographs look very nice on the walls, especially as Carrie had arranged some Liberty silk bows on the four corners of them. The first arrival was Gowing, who, with his usual taste, greeted me with, "Hello, Pooter, why, your trousers are too short." I simply said, "Very likely you will find my temper short also." He said, "That will make your trousers longer, Juggins. You should get your missus to put a flounce on them." I wonder I waste my time entering his insulting observations in my diary. The next arrivals were Mr. and Mrs. Cummings. The former said, "As you didn't say anything about the dress, I have come half-dress." He had on a black frock coat and white tie. The Jameses, Mr. Merton and Mr. Stilbrook arrived, but Lupin was restless and unbearable till his Daisy Mutlow and Frank arrived. Carrie and I were rather startled at Daisy's appearance. She had a bright crimson dress on, cut very low in the neck. I do not think such a style modest. She ought to have taken a lesson from Carrie, and covered her shoulders with a little lace. Mr. Knackles, Mr. Sprice-Hogg, and his 4 daughters came. So did Franching, and 1 or 2 of Lupin's new friends, members of the Holloway comedians. Some of these seemed rather theatrical in their manner, especially one who was posing all the evening, and leant on our little round table and cracked it. Lupin called him our Henry, and said he was our lead at the HCs, and was quite good in that department as Frank Mutler was as the low comedy merchant. All this is Greek to me. We had some music, and Lupin, who never left Daisy's side for a moment, raved over her singing of a song called Some Day. It seemed a pretty song, but she made such grimaces, and sang, to my mind, so out of tune, I would not have asked her to sing again. But Lupin made her sing 4 songs right off, one after the other. At 10 o'clock we went down to supper, and from the way Gowing and Cummings ate, you would have thought they had not had a meal for a month. I told Carrie to keep something back in case Mr. Perkupp should come by mere chance. Gowing annoyed me very much by filling a large tumbler of champagne and drinking it straight off. He repeated his action, and made me fear our half-dozen of champagne would not last out. I tried to keep a bottle back, but Lupin got hold of it, and took it to the side table with Daisy and Frank Mutler. We went upstairs, and the young fellows began skylarking. Carrie put a stop to that at once. Stilbrook amused us with a song. What have you done with your cousin John? I did not notice that Lupin and Frank had disappeared. I asked Mr. Watson, one of the Holloways, where they were, and he said, "That's a case of, oh, what a surprise." We were directed to form a circle, which we did. Watson then said, I have much pleasure in introducing the celebrated Blondin Donkey." Frank and Lupin then bounded into the room. Lupin had whitened his face like a clown, and Frank had tied round his waist a large hearthrug. He was supposed to be the donkey, and he looked it. They indulged in a very noisy pantomime, and were all shrieking with laughter. I turned round suddenly, and then I saw Mr. Perkupp standing halfway in the door, he having arrived without our knowing it. I beckoned Carrie, and we went up to him at once. He would not come right into the room. I apologized for the foolery, but Mr. Perkupp said, "Oh, it seems amusing." I could see he was not a bit amused. Carrie and I took him downstairs, but the table was a wreck. There was not a glass of champagne left, not even a sandwich. Mr. Perkupp said he required nothing, but would like a glass of seltzer or soda water. The last siphon was empty. Carrie said, "We have plenty of port wine left." Mr. Perkupp said with a smile, "No, thank you. I really require nothing, but I'm most pleased to see you and your husband in your own home. Good night, Mrs. Pooter. Will you excuse my very short stay? I know. Sorry, you will excuse my very short stay, I know." I went with him to his carriage, and he said, "Don't trouble to come to the office till 12 tomorrow." I felt despondent as I went back to the house, and I told Carrie I thought the party was a failure. Carrie said it was a great success, and I was only tired, and insisted on my having some port myself. I drank 2 glasses, and felt much better, and we went into the drawing-room where they had commenced dancing. Carrie and I had a little dance, which I said reminded me of old days. She said I was a spoony old thing. Chapter 10. Reflections. I make another good joke. Am annoyed at the constant serving up of the blancmange. Lupin expresses his opinion of weddings. Lupin falls out with Daisy Mutler. November 16th. Woke about 20 times during the night with terrible thirst. Finished off all the water in the bottle, as well as half that in the jug. Kept dreaming, also, that last night's party was a failure, and that a lot of low people came without invitation, and kept chaffing and throwing things at Mr. Perkupp, till at last I was obliged to hide him in the box-room, which we had just discovered, with a bath-towel over him. It seems absurd now, but it was painfully real in the dream. I had the same dream about a dozen times. Carrie annoyed me by saying, "You know champagne never agrees with you." I told her I had only a couple of glasses of it, having kept myself entirely to port. I added that good champagne hurt nobody, and Lupin told me he had only got it from a traveller as a favour, as that particular brand had been entirely bought up by a West End club. I think I ate too heartily of the side dishes, as the waiter called them. I said to Carrie, "I wish I had put those side dishes aside." I repeated this, but Carrie was busy packing up the teaspoons we had borrowed of Mrs. Cummings for the party. It was just 11:30, and I was starting for the office when Lupin appeared with a yellow complexion and said, "Hello, Gov, what priced head have you this morning?" I told him he might just as well speak to me in Dutch. He added, "When I woke this morning my head was as big as Baldwin's balloon." On the spur of the moment I said the cleverest thing I think I have ever said. "Perhaps that accounts for the parachuting pains." We all 3 roared. November 17th. Still feel tired and headachy. In the evening, Gowing called and was full of praise about our party last Wednesday. He said everything was done beautifully and he enjoyed himself enormously. Gowing can be a very nice fellow when he likes, but you never know how long it will last. For instance, he stopped to supper and, seeing some blancmange on the table, shouted out, while the servant was in the room, "Hello, the remains of Wednesday." November 18th. Woke up quite fresh after a good night's rest and feel quite myself again. I am satisfied a life of going out and society is not a life for me. We therefore declined the invitation which we received this morning to Miss Bird's wedding. We only met her twice at Mrs. James's, and it means a present. Lupin said, I'm with you for once. To my mind, a wedding's a very poor play. There are only two parts in it, the bride and the bridegroom. The best man is only a walking gentleman. With the exception of a crying father and a snivelling mother, the rest are supers who have to dress well and have to pay for their insignificant parts in the shape of costly presents. I did not care for the theatrical slang, but thought it clever, though disrespectful. I told Sarah to bring up the blancmange, not to bring up the blancmange again for breakfast. It seems to have been placed on our table at every meal since Wednesday. Cummings came round in the evening and congratulated us on the success of our party. He said it was the best party he had been to for many a year, and he wished we had let him know it was full dress, as he would have turned up in his swallowtails. We sat down to a quiet game of dominoes, and were interrupted by the noisy entrance of Lupin and Frank Mutler. Cummings and I asked them to join us. Lupin said he did not care for dominoes and suggested a game of spoof. On my asking if it required counters, Frank and Lupin, in measured time, said, 1, 2, 3, go! Have you an estate in Greenland? It was simply Greek to me, but it appears it is one of the customs of the Holloway comedians to do this when a member displays ignorance. In spite of my instructions, that blancmange was brought up again for supper. To make matters worse, there had been an attempt to disguise it by placing it in a glass dish with jam round it. Carrie asked Lupin if he would have some, and he replied, no second-hand goods for me, thank you. I told Carrie, when we were alone, if that blancmange were placed on the table again, I should walk out of the house. November 19th, Sunday. A delightfully quiet day. In the afternoon, Lupin was off to spend the rest of the day with the Mutlers. He departed in the best of spirits, and Carrie said, well, one advantage of Lupin's engagement with Daisy is that the boy seems happy all day long. That quite reconciles me to what I must confess seems an imprudent engagement. Carrie and I talked the matter over during the evening and agreed that it did not always follow that an early engagement meant an unhappy marriage. Dear Carrie reminded me that we married early, and with the exception of a few trivial misunderstandings, we had never really had a serious word. I could not help thinking, as I told her, that half the pleasures of life were derived from the little struggles and small privations that one had to endure at the beginning of one's married life. Such struggles were generally occasioned by want of means, and often helped to make loving couples stand together all the firmer. Carrie said I expressed myself wonderfully well, and that I was quite a philosopher. We are all vain at times, and I must confess I felt flattered by Carrie's little compliment. I don't pretend to be able to express myself in fine language, but I feel I have the power of expressing my thoughts with simplicity and lucidness. About 9 o'clock, to our surprise, Lupin entered with a wild, reckless look, and in a hollow voice, which I must say seemed rather theatrical, said, "Have you any brandy?" I said, "No, but here is some whisky." Lupin drank off nearly a wine-glassful without water, to my horror. We all three sat reading in silence till 10, when Carrie and I rose to go to bed. Carrie said to Lupin, "I hope Daisy is well?" Lupin, with a forced, careless air that he must have picked up from the Holloway comedians, replied, "Oh, Daisy? You mean Miss Mutler? I don't know whether she is well or not, but please never to mention her name again in my presence." I'm just going to check how long the next chapter is, because I think I might actually want to stop there. Nah, it's okay. We'll do one more chapter. We've got one more chapter. Chapter 11. We have a dose of Irving imitations. Make the acquaintance of Mr. Padge. Don't care for him. Mr. Berwin Fosselton becomes a nuisance. November 20th. Have seen nothing of Lupin the whole day. Bought a cheap address book. I spent the evening copying the names and addresses of my friends and acquaintances. Left out the Mutlers, of course. November 21st. Lupin turned up for a few minutes in the evening. He asked for a drop of brandy with a sort of careless look, which to my mind was theatrical and quite ineffective. I said, "My boy, I have none, and I don't think I should give it you if I had." Lupin said, "I'll go where I can get some," and walked out of the house. Carrie took the boy's part, and the rest of the evening was spent in a disagreeable discussion in which the words Daisy and Mutlar must have occurred 1,000 times. November 22nd. Gowing and Cummings dropped in during the evening. Lupin also came in, bringing his friend Mr. Berwin Fosselton, one of the Holloway comedians, who was at our party the other night and who cracked our little round table. Happy to say Daisy Mutlar was never referred to. The conversation was almost entirely monopolised by the young fellow Fosselton, who not only looked rather like Mr. Irving, but seemed to imagine that he was the celebrated actor. I must say he gave some capital imitations of him. As he showed no signs of moving at supper time, I said, "If you like to stay, Mr. Fosselton, for our usual crust, pray do." He replied, "Oh, thanks, but please call me Mr. Berwin Fosselton. It is a double name. There are lots of Fosseltons, but please call me Berwin Fosselton." He began doing the Irving business all through supper. He sank so low down in his chair that his chin was almost on a level with the table, and twice he kicked Carrie under the table, upset his wine, and flashed a knife uncomfortably near Gowing's face. After supper he kept stretching out his legs on the fender, indulging in scraps of quotations from plays which were Greek to me, and more than once knocked over the fire irons, making a hideous row. Poor Carrie already having a bad headache. When he went, he said, to our surprise, "I will come tomorrow and bring my Irving makeup." Gowing and Cummings said they would like to see it and would come too. I could not help thinking they might as well give a party at my house while they are about it. However, as Carrie sensibly said, do anything, dear, to make Lupin forget the Daisy Mutlar business. November 23rd. In the evening, Cummings came early. Gowing came a little later and brought, without asking permission, a fat and, I think, very vulgar-looking man named Padge, who appeared to be all moustache. Gowing never attempted any apology to either of us, but said Padge wanted to see the Irving business, to which Padge said, "That's right." And that is about all he did say during the entire evening. Lupin came in and seemed in much better spirits. He had prepared a bit of a surprise. Mr. Berwin Fosselton had come in with him, but had gone upstairs to get ready. In half an hour Lupin retired from the parlour, and returning in a few minutes announced, "Mr. Henry Irving." I must say we were all astounded. I never saw such a resemblance. It was astonishing. The only person who did not appear interested was the man Padge, who had got the best armchair and was puffing away at a foul pipe into the fireplace. After some little time, I said, "Why do actors always wear their hair so long?" Carrie, in a moment, said, "Mr. Hare doesn't wear long hair." How we laughed, except Mr. Fosselton, who said, in a rather patronizing kind of way, "The joke, Mrs. Pooter, is extremely appropriate, if not altogether new." Thinking this rather a snub, I said, "Mr. Fosselton, I fancy—" He interrupted me by saying, "Mr. Berwin Fosselton, if you please," which made me quite forget what I was going to say to him. During the supper, Mr. Berwin Fosselton again monopolised the conversation with his Irving talk, and both Carrie and I came to the conclusion one can have even too much imitation. Both Carrie and I came to the conclusion one can have even too much imitation of Irving. After supper, Mr. Berwin Fosselton got a little too boisterous over his Irving imitation, and suddenly seized Gowing by the collar of his coat, dug his thumbnail, accidentally of course, into Gowing's neck, and took a piece of flesh out. Gowing was rightly annoyed, but that man Padge, who, having declined our modest supper in order that he should not lose his comfortable chair, burst into an uncontrollable fit of laughter at the little misadventure. I was so annoyed at the conduct of Padge, I said, "I suppose you would have laughed if he had poked Mr. Gowing's eye out?" To which Padge replied, "That's right," and laughed more than ever. I think perhaps the greatest surprise was when we broke up for Mr. Berwin Fosselton. For Mr. Berwin Fosselton said, "Good night, Mr. Pooter. I'm glad you like the imitation. I'll bring the other make-up tomorrow night." November 24th. I went to town without a pocket handkerchief. This is the second time I have done this during the last week. I must be losing my memory. Had it not been for this Daisy Mutlar business, I would have written to Mr. Berwin Fosselton and told him I should be out this evening, but I fancy he is the sort of young man who would come all the same. Dear old Cummings came in the evening, but Gowing sent round a little note saying he hoped I would excuse his not turning up, which rather amused me. He added that his neck was still painful. Of course, Berwin Fosselton came, and Lupin never turned up, and imagine my utter disgust when that man Padge actually came again, and not even accompanied by Gowing. I was exasperated and said, "Mr. Padge, this is a surprise." Dear Carrie, fearing unpleasantness, said, "Oh, I suppose Mr. Padge has only come to see the other Irving make-up." Mr. Padge said, "That's right," and took the best chair again, from which he never moved the whole evening. My only consolation is he takes no supper, so he is not an expensive guest, but I shall speak to Gowing about the matter. The Irving imitations and conversations occupied the whole evening till I was sick of it. Once we had a rather heated discussion, which was commenced by Cummings saying that it appeared to him that Mr. Berwin Fosselton was not only like Mr. Irving, but was, in his judgment, every way as good or even better. I ventured to remark that, after all, it was but an imitation of an original. Cummings said surely some imitations were better than the originals. I made what I considered to be a very clever remark. Without an original there can be no imitation. Mr. Berwin Fosselton said, quite impertinently, "Don't discuss me in my presence, if you please, and, Mr. Pooter, I should advise you to talk about what you understand." To which that cad Padge replied, "That's right." Dear Carrie saved the whole thing by suddenly saying, "I'll be Ellen Terry." Dear Carrie's imitation wasn't a bit liked, but she was so spontaneous and so funny that the disagreeable discussion passed off. When they left, I very pointedly said to Berwin Fosselton and Mr. Padge that we should be engaged tomorrow evening. November 25th. Had a long letter from Mr. Fosselton respecting last night's Irving discussion. I was very angry, and I wrote and said I knew little or nothing about stage matters and was not in the least interested in them, and positively declined to be drawn into a discussion on the subject, even at the risk of its leading to a breach of friendship. I never wrote a more determined letter. On returning home at the usual hour on Saturday afternoon, I met, near the archway, Daisy Mutlar. My heart gave a leap. I bowed rather stiffly, but she affected not to have seen me. Very much annoyed in the evening by the laundress sending home an odd sock, Sarah said she sent 2 pairs, and the laundress declared only 1.5 pairs were sent. I spoke to Carrie about it, but she rather testily replied, "I am tired of speaking to her. You had better go and speak to her yourself. She is outside." I did so, but the laundress declared that only an odd sock was sent. Gowing passed into the passage at this time, and was rude enough to listen to the conversation, and interrupting, said, "Don't waste the odd sock, old man. Do an act of charity and give it to some poor man with only one leg." The laundress giggled like an idiot. I was disgusted, and walked upstairs for the purpose of pinning down my collar, as the button had come off the back of my shirt. When I returned to the parlour, Gowing was retailing his idiotic joke about the odd sock, and Carrie was roaring with laughter. I suppose I am losing my sense of humour. I spoke my mind pretty freely about Padge. Gowing said he had met him only once before that evening. He had been introduced by a friend, and as he, Padge, had stood a good dinner, Gowing wished to show him some little return. Upon my word, Gowing's coolness surpassed all belief. Lupin came in before I could reply, and Gowing unfortunately inquired after Daisy Mutler. Lupin shouted, "Mind your own business, sir," and bounced out of the room, slamming the door. "Oh, it's okay, Joey, I'm just shouting at the book, don't worry." I startled my son, and he woke up. The remainder of the night was Daisy Mutler, Daisy Mutler, Daisy Mutler. Oh dear. November 26th, Sunday. The curate preached a very good sermon today. Very good indeed. His appearance is never so impressive as our dear old vicar's, but I am bound to say his sermons are much more impressive. A rather annoying incident occurred, of which I must make mention. Mrs. Fernloss, who is quite a grand lady, living in one of those large houses in the Camden Road, stopped to speak to me after church, when we were all coming out. I must say I felt flattered, for she is thought a good deal of. I suppose she knew me through seeing me so often take round the plate, especially as she always occupies the corner seat of the pew. She is a very influential lady, and may have had something of the utmost importance to say, but, unfortunately, as she commenced to speak, a strong gust of wind came and blew my hat off into the middle of the road. I had to run after it, and had the greatest difficulty in recovering it. When I had succeeded in doing so, I found Mrs. Fernloss had walked on with some swell friends, and I felt I could not well approach her now, especially as my hat was smothered with mud. I cannot say how disappointed I felt. In the evening, Sunday evening, of all others, I found an impertinent note from Mr. Berwin Fosselton, which ran as follows. "Dear Mr. Pooter, although your junior by perhaps some 20 or 30 years, which is sufficient reason that you ought to have a longer record of the things and ways in this miniature of a planet, I feel it is just within the bounds of possibility that the wheels of your life don't travel so quickly round as those of the humble writer of these lines. The dandy horse of past days has been known to overtake the slow coach. Do I make myself understood? Very well, then. You want to come over? One hand. There you go. He heard me talking. He woke up. And now... No, he didn't want to go on my lap. Okay. I'm right at the end of the... Okay. 1 second. We made it so far. I shall pick this back up. Right. Very well then. Permit me, Mr. Pooter, to advise you to accept the verb sap. Acknowledge your defeat, and take your whipping gracefully. For remember, you threw down the glove, and I cannot claim to be either mentally or physically a coward. Revenons à nos moutons. Our lives run in different grooves. I live for my art, the stage. Your life is devoted to commercial pursuits, a life among ledgers. My books are of a different metal. Your life in the city is honourable, I admit, but how different. Cannot even you see the ocean between us, a channel that prevents the meeting of our brains in harmonious accord? Ah, but chacun a son goût. I have registered a vow to mount the steps of fame. I may crawl, I may slip, I may even falter. We are all weak. But reach the top rung of the ladder I will. When there, my voice shall be heard, for I will shout to the multitudes below, Vici! For the present I am only an amateur, and my work is unknown, forsooth, save to a party of friends, with here and there an enemy. But, Mr. Pooter, let me ask you, what is the difference between an amateur and a professional? None. Stay. Yes, there is a difference. One is paid for doing what the other does as skilfully for nothing. But I will be paid too, for I, contrary to the wishes of my family and friends, have at last elected to adopt the stage as my profession. And when the farce craze is over, and mark you, that will be soon, I will make my power known. For I feel, pardon my apparent conceit, that there is no living man who can play the humpbacked Richard as I feel and know I can. And you will be the first to come round and bend your head in submission. There are many matters you may understand, but knowledge of the fine art of acting is to you an unknown quantity. Pray let this discussion cease with this letter. Vale! Yours truly, Bowen Fosselton. I was disgusted. When Lupin came in, I handed him this impertinent letter and said, My boy, in that letter you can see the true character of your friend. Lupin, to my surprise, said, Oh, yes, he showed me the letter before he sent it. I think he is right, and you ought to apologize. And that brings us to the end of the chapter, and ordinarily about where we take a break, but I need to take it easy, and to be honest, we might even be able to finish out the book in the next one. I'm not sure. There's quite a lot to go for one stream. I'm not sure. Oh, actually, yeah, no, just counting out, there's actually quite, yeah, there's considerable. What? No, it's 100 pages. Yeah, no, we'll see. We'll see. No promises. But yeah, that brings us to the end. You think you took a writing workshop with this guy? Guy is quite something. Yeah, he's. I feel like we can all agree that Bowen Fosselton is, I think, someone we're meant to laugh at. You're perhaps not quite as good or important as you think. You certainly hope so. Yeah. I do get sort of an odd vibe from this book. There's times where I'm not sure if I'm just missing jokes sometimes, or if some of the stuff that's just lightly comedic registered a lot heavier back when it was written. But yeah, it's an interesting one, full of stuff that happens. I appreciate, and so it feels like an slightly odd thing to pick out and appreciate. But his son shows up, and sure, his son also kind of everyone seems like a little bit of an arse in some way. His son shows up and says, "Hey, don't call me Willie anymore. Just call me Lupin." And his dad takes a couple of goes to get it right, but he gets corrected on it. It's okay, fine. I'm from now on going to refer to you as Lupin. It's not everything we ask for in this modern society, but a father respecting his son's wishes to go by a different name, and doing so. You like that? Yeah. I noticed that. I was yeah, okay, fine. We'll give you a point for that one. We'll put that in the good column. But yeah, that I think, brings us more or less meanderingly to the end of the stream. I think there were some interesting bits in the foot. Oh, for goodness sake. Okay, we're going to close things out because Joey wants to come back in and I can't just keep getting up and then resettling. Trying to think what interesting bits there were. Oh, the jump from August to October, which is easier to notice in the text rather than probably read aloud. Where the whole section of the diary has gone missing, which is explained in the footnotes as Punch magazine, where this was published, having dropped the diary for 2 months in the autumn of 1888. This was an amusing way for pt to explain the gap. So it was being published as a diary, like a journal in Punch magazine, and so they dropped it for a couple of months, and so the character himself is like, yo, someone's been tearing pages out of my diary and throwing it out, which, yeah, you know, nice one. That's a good way to handle that. Which, so that's the thing, there's all sorts of bits and pieces like that, like the thing with the pub as well, which are covered in the footnotes, or not, the appendices even, sorry. You did wonder you hadn't been paying attention to the dates, but then it said the pages have been torn out and you wondered the dates acknowledge that. Yes, yeah, that's the thing. It's, yeah, like, being read aloud like this, it's harder to keep track of that information, but on a page you can just look and go, hang on a second, yeah, that's, you've gone from like 23rd of August to the 30th of October, damn, okay. Which, yeah. Right, I'm gonna do a stretch and then close things down and take myself out of the stream. Nothing more drastic than that. And yeah. What is coming up? It's I don't know how Lucy's going to be next week on what her schedule is, because I know she's hells of busy in the coming weeks, and also ill. So the possible Wednesday stream, I don't know. We will look and see how things are, and put information on the Discord. You liking the book? Good. I am glad. Thank you. Yeah, I am enjoying it too. It's not what I expected, but it is very readable. I feel like I'm just sort of flying through it super quickly. Good, I'm glad people are enjoying it. Yeah, I don't know what I'm going to read next. Once I'm done with this, I'll have to like pick up some short stories, because it feels weird to be going through October and not reading something with, you know, ghosts and stuff in it. But yeah, thank you for being here. Thank you for enjoying this. I'm going to go. I'm not raiding anywhere. So yeah, take care of yourselves, look after yourselves, have a good however much of the weekend is left to you. And we will see you on the next one. Goodbye and good night.